Okay, Robert, what's really interesting about real estate chat and all of our chatters, supporters, viewers is that there's so many different opinions. And also when you go to the media, the banks, the real estate brokers, real estate agents, everybody's got an opinion about real estate. But you know what's interesting that you brought up many times before, Robert?
Well,
What if these opinions and point of view are based on stats that are kind of iffy? Like, if the numbers aren't saying what they're supposed to say, overstating, understating, whatever it is, would it change, number one, the actual market? Number two, would it change the actual perception of the market? What do you think, Robert?
okay. There's three things there. You got it down to two very good questions. What we have generally in North America is unreliable sources of information. We are now getting used to being skeptical of our government statistics. We, in the business particularly, got to absolutely rely on what the numbers that came out of the local association that were then uploaded to the Ontario Association, and they uploaded it to the National Association. So the National Association, every on the 15th of the month, gave national statistics on this is where sales are, and this is seasonally adjusting. We've got a benchmark HPI that tells you what changed. And we would just rely, and that was true. Like, why would they fudge it? Why would they fudge it? So,
Well, is it purposefully or purposefully or not? That's one of the things we're going to be talking about, but
okay,
also,
now I want to go back to your questions.
yeah,
Will it change the perception of what's going on? Yes, of course, because people are still relying on that data source. Will it change the market? Of course not, because most people are observers. Let's say 10% of the whole population are participants, and the rest of them that are paying attention at all to real estate. Some people never care about real estate at all. So the subset that are actually trying to do something, the 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 9,000 people who make a deal selling, and then the same amount again buying every month, they know what's going on because they're living it. People who are observing it saying, well, maybe next year if it gets good and we won't go in Florida, we're going to stay here and kids can sell. Or somebody says, well, if I save like I'm doing it, I get a new promotion, then maybe we can buy. Maybe we have to buy in London, but we can buy. So the buyer, the seller, as we talked about, the five categories of consumers. And then the other thing is the three scenarios, which we'll deal with in another case of what's the best case, the worst case, and the most probable case that's going to happen in the next 2 to 5 years. If that's the window that you're considering, if you're considering 25 years, oh, it's anybody's guess. But it's up. But in 2 to 5 years, what's probably going to happen? What are interest rates going to be then? What are interest rates now? Are you better off waiting? You're better off. And what are prices? And are you better off waiting, going ahead? So you are asking. The statistics sometimes throw everybody for a loop. And they can. This one that we're going to talk about today is passed through Toronto to CREA, and it shows up in the Bank of Canada Monetary Report, one of the benchmark metrics that they use to come and assess in their own brain, again, in the back window, what happened last month, what happened 3 months ago, is what they call the sales to listing ratio. The number of listings in a given month divided by the number of sales in that given month, and you come up with a number. And the number is, if it's below 42%, that's buyer's market territory, nothing selling. If it's in the middle between 42.5 and 62.5, that's balanced, depends on the market. So, it's an average. And if it's over 62%, it's seller's territory, meaning everything is selling. It's gobbling up. You got to move fast. The price is going up. Seller's market, balanced market, buyer's market. So that's how, if the sales to listing ratio was the only thing that our Tiffany Gift McMacklin was deciding on, we would have to make sure that it's absolutely precise. But he's not. He's looking at 10 different things and all over the place. And so it's not just this one thing. But the significance of the accuracy of our information, particularly the sales to listing ratio, is important because of what it does all the way up the chain. So today in the post-haste, our dearly beloved columnist mentioned a report, and she quotes it almost verbatim. Takes a couple of charts from there from TD Economics, who we've talked to this fellow all the time, Rishi Sondhi. He's Ontario for sure, and he looks at Canada real estate for the TD Bank. Now, the TD Bank, apart from giving out mortgages, is not in the real estate business, but they are attached to the real estate business because the hotter the market is, the more demand there'll be for mortgages. And sort of the overall wealth improves, because if everybody's house goes up in value by 25%, then a lot of people will say, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some money out of there and make monthly payments on it and put some money into the stock market, or I'm going to do something, or rather I'm going to buy it, whatever they're going to do. So the overall wellness, I hate to use that word, health, positive attitude, consumer confidence, I guess is the term that everybody uses. If the consumer confidence is reinforced, supported, or just absolutely fantastic, then it's good for everybody, except for our Tiffany Macklin, who says, oh, everybody's in a good mood, I'm going to quit that, knock that down with higher interest rates. So good news is bad, bad news is good. So today, Rishi Sondhi came up with a report that he's been working on for a while, because he's been saying, oh, I think we better have our projection for the end of the first quarter next year be 10% down, where before I said it was going to be 5% down, prices. And this is where everybody is focusing on. We look at the mechanics of it. Everybody's focusing on what will the impact be on prices, home prices, because if home prices go down or go up, then Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public feels better or worse. And if there just happens to be an elections coming up, they feel better or worse about the person who they deem to be responsible for that better or worseness. So this chap is very well educated. I don't know how old he is. I've never met him. I'm going to try and meet him now, because he is just looking at everything he could possibly imagine. We'll put this in the notes. John suggests we put it in the notes, and yes, this must be there, because he's saying, okay, is this like what happened in the 1990s where prices fell 50%? Is this like that? And he said, oh no, it's different. It's got to be different, because like, look at employment numbers that like our Tiffany is looking at. Look at the population, and look at all this immigration, and look at all this stuff. It's much different. It's not the same. It's not the same. And investor activity, we didn't have this number of specs in the market back then. You know, it's all different. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is he doesn't know. Now, what we're going to talk about now is what people in the real estate business, if they thought about it, would know. But a lot of people in the real estate business don't think about it, because their main job is to sit across the table or in the car with someone who wants to buy a house, or sit on the Zoom or in the office and talk to somebody who wants to sell their house. And all they want to do is talk about that house and that consumer's situation for the next 2 months, because that's all they know for sure. That's all I know for sure. What's going to happen in the next 2 months, which is the window that these customers, consumers, clients are interested in having their problem solved with.
Well, let's show Robert. Let's give them a visual about that in terms of how it relates. Because in our previous episode of Real Estate Chat, for those of you who have subscribed and liked that episode,
Yeah,
talked about the terminate relist is the proper word or proper terminology for that.
Yeah.
But this is so we won't spend too much time on this chart because we explained it. Just watch our previous episode, but give us a glimpse, a quick
quickie on what this is 2 lines. You got a red line, you got a blue line. The blue line is what the Toronto Real Estate Board reports, and the red line is when I subtract the do-overs, the terminate relists from that number, so that instead of double counting, we're just single counting every single property. Now, the definition is it's a do-over, it's a relist if it's the same owner, the same property, the same listing broker within the same original listing period, which is normally 60 days as a minimum, could be 9 months. But if, sometimes you see it 4 times in the first month, and they keep counting each one of these as a new listing. So it changes the ratios. It changes the impression of what the market is. Right now, if that red line is correct, I may have overestimated. I will definitely have overestimated compared to the Toronto Real Estate Board's estimate, because they are trying to get the next step, which is the sales to listing ratio, in line. They're going to try and show we can't change the sales, but they can change the number of new listings. So I won't say they're fudging it, but they're fiddling with it. So that's all for that one. Now, Mr. Sondhi was trying to say, what's the parallel market? Where are prices going to be? Are they going to drop like they did in the 90s by 50%? Now, if you adjust for inflation over a long period of time, then it's not 50%. It was 283,000 in the fall of 1989, and it ended up just under 200,000 in the third quarter of 1996. Now, that's a long time, but if you adjust for inflation in the meantime, it's not quite so bad as 50%. But again, to go from 283 to 196, you figure out what the math is. Anyway, I've got a chart that shows it's not quite that bad. So here we have the last several booms. The peak that occurred in July of 1981, the peak that occurred in October of 89, the peak that occurred in April 08, the peak that occurred in April 17, and the peak that occurred in February 22, all stopped rising for different reasons. Several were interest rates. Sometimes it was government intervention. Other times it was, it was the this whole financial crisis brewing. So we were suggested by this British Royal Bank economist, Robert Howe, to coincide, put them all into 100, so the peak is 100, and coincide those peaks, and then let them run, see where they go. So we found that in 3 or 4 of the prior peaks, the model had returned or exceeded 90% of the previous peak within 24 months. The exception is the time between 1986 and 1996, which is the time that was suggested by Mr. Sondhi. So in this chart, our current year is the red with the white stars, diamonds, whatever you want to call it. And the one that I'm suggesting for 2 years now, that the most parallel model to use is in green with orangey stars. And that traipses out and keeps on traipsing up and down a little bit till it sort of settles out around 70% of the peak. So we know what our peak was, 1.33. And we've sort of been farting around all in the middle of up and down and what happened. And so we saw our thing go down. And so now we want to know what's going to happen next. So can we think that when we come to 2 years, that it'll be the same as the other 3 or 4 peaks, that we'll have returned to 90% of where we were? Well, right now we're at 81% of the price at the very peak. And so it could be we'll go up to 90% before next March.
In a worst case, we might dip 30% off peak, is what you're saying, if it follows the 90s model.
If it follows. So I said, is there another way that I can come up with a parallel? That I can present a model that will give a suggestion that we can not rely on, because as Mr. Sondhi says, there's a lot of different things that are different. I'm much different than I was in 1990. I've been married twice since then. Okay. There's a lot of things different about the whole economy since then. So if we put up the other slide, this is where we take the price of the Toronto Real Estate Report average price and adjust it for the CPI. Now, the CPI is nothing except for what they call it. But if we adjust the prices and we put 1989 peak as 100, then we let everything else flow back and forward from there. This starts in 1969. I got my license in my registration, just a little bit after April the 9th, 1974, because on April the 9th, 1974, I remember so clearly, because Ontario introduced the land speculation tax. Now it went away and it came back. So that's why I remember that. And then it went down. So if we look at where we are right now, the last blue line ticked down. We haven't got today in there. No, we haven't got today in there, but it only moved by 4%. It won't change that much. So here we are at 194 compared to the 100, which is going back to 1989. If we go back to the previous peak was in 2007, and the adjusted number was 977, 674. Now, if we go back to the other side of 1989, where 100 was 1989, and we go back to the previous peak, The previous peak was 55.07 of the 100. So that's 45. So does the right was written there in black? Does the peak before the recent peak tell us anything? Perhaps an indication of the future floor, which is what everybody's guessing at, including Mr. Sondhi and including everybody who's trying to decide, should I buy now? Should I wait? Is it an investment? Is it a place to live? What am I trying to do? Will I wait for interest rates to come down when everybody else jumps in, or should I jump in now and try and find someone who really wants to sell bad and buy a little bit under the market? So if we see that the previous peak of 977 is sort of the same thing, it's not the same ratio. One was 45% below the peak, but 2 peaks before. And this one is, I can't do the math fast enough. 168 and 194. It's not that much down. Does that tell us anything? But definitely, Mr. Sondhi to say 50% is overstating it, but it's possible. It could go down 45%. We're standing here saying that, yes, it sure could go down 30%. And since we're already down by 18, and at one time it was 23, we can go 30%, no problem. And there's many people who are trying to buy a house who would say, I would like it to come from 1.33 to $1 million, or the regular house to come from 700,000 to 525,000. And I would like interest rates to come down from nearly 6 and then qualify at 8 with the stress test down to 3.5, 4.25. And then I could afford it. And that's what we're looking for, is what's the future of the Toronto Real Estate Board market? Because we don't know anything about Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's got a boom going on with their cobalt and with their iron, or no, it's bauxite. And, there's the oil boom. So, Alberta now has got their, they think they're all cocky and running the world. And in actual fact, they're very cyclical. And
Well, it's a time will tell, right? So, I mean, Robert, for those of
it's not about time will tell. It's about, we know with a certainty that interest rates are not going up. So that means they're going down, or they're staying flat. How low will they go, and how long will it take to get there? We know with a certainty that the market is eroding. Hardly any sales. Prices staying steady. So if affordability, if price is one of them, if interest rates is another one, and consumers' income and confidence are the other, we need to bolster consumers' confidence. We need to moderate the increase in the rate of prices, and we need to drop the interest rates. Now, prices are going to come down because they must, because nobody wants them where they are except for the people who hold that real estate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people on the other side of it. So it's going to come down. But it's not bad, because you've got something tangible. You're still living there. It's all a paper loss. If you bought there in the last 5 years, maybe you're gonna suffer a paper loss. But now, when you refinance your mortgage, you're going to get it at a better rate, and the monthly payment will be okay.
So it's all about looking at the reality of getting as accurate as possible with this data and figures. And make sure you're watching Real Estate Chat so that you're constantly updated and given the right context in terms of how to look at things. So make sure you leave in the chat any of your comments. As Robert mentioned too, all of these resources that we referenced today will be...
Well, John, one more thing. What's got to be said is that both of us are active players in the real estate business, that we are doing this so that you will say, that's the kind of person that I want to have represent me. Now, John is the whole office manager. He's got like 200 people that he could match you up with language or location, that he can say, well, you know what, I think that probably Billy or Mrs. whatever would be good for you. And definitely, if you want to trade in real estate in the Greater Toronto area, that's more or less Yonge Street from Eglinton up to Aurora, then there's 3 or 4 people who are better than me, but I don't know who they are. And that's why we're doing this. So you can reach us. Down below, we've got the contact information, and that's the whole point of it.
Reach out if you have any questions. Thanks for watching this episode of Real Estate Chat. Take care, and bye for now.